Hello, everybody. So I'm Sam Lane and I run a photography business, and I'm here to talk about how you can go greener with your photography for your business. So I hope you're having a good time so far. In preparing for this, I thought long and hard about what it is to be a sustainable photographer. And I know I can do a lot of things personally, sort of recycle things, and I don't drive anymore, and I get everywhere by public transport where I can. And I was just thinking, what does it mean to be green? I think the best thing I can offer you is some tips and tricks on how you can take better photos for your business, instead of leaving the home or traveling anywhere or paying for somebody else's services. So one thing we do with the British Library is I run a little tips for taking better photos for your business using your smartphone, because as the old adage goes, the best camera is the one that you have with you. And now I think there are at least somewhere in the region of 3.8 billion devices, smartphone devices out there in the world. And the iPhone is, there's only 33 models of iPhone, but there's 24,000 different models of Android smartphone devices. So there's a lot of devices out there, and everybody's a photographer. The quality of the devices has got so much better as well. Back in 2017, there was a project by the Time magazine that they were featuring females, the first females, a photographer on Instagram who solely took photos on their smartphone device. And she was using her name was Louise Storr, and she was using an iPhone. And actually, this photo of Hillary Clinton was taken by her using her iPhone. And so the quality is good enough for the print magazine cover, and the quality is just getting better all the time. So use the device that you've got with you. Notice in this picture, we'll come back to talking about this in a bit, that the light is actually being blocked from Hillary in this picture, but you can see there's very little setup, there's very little cost that's gone into, apart from buying the device in the first place, but there's not too much kit used here, and it's out in nature using natural light. So the first thing to kind of talk about, in being sort of sustainable, it's about using the best kit you've got. And obviously there's a desire these days to upgrade your kits to the latest shiny new gadgets, but basically the devices are really good already, and everything kind of from about 5 years ago still has a really good camera in it, both on the front and the back. But optimizing what you can do with the smartphone that you've got, whatever unit you have, is key, so that you can, when you get it out of your bag or get it out of your pocket, you know exactly what you're going to do, and you can understand where all the settings are. So the first thing to do is understanding this amazing piece of toolkit that you've got in your possession. Understand what operating system, whether it's an Apple iOS system or an Android device or Windows or whatever. Understanding how the camera function works. Actually, just going back to the operating systems, always keeping your software up to date is really useful. With Apple devices, you can choose to automatically do that. It helps to kind of keep your battery optimized, and it gives you additional tips and features, but it's useful for keeping the longevity of your device. Android, the operating system is 12 at the moment, but not all Android devices are updated to the latest system. So you'll have to check with your own device, just double check the manual or online. Understanding how the camera function works. There's about 7 different ways to switch on the camera on an iPhone these days. So just understand how easy it is to get to switching on your camera. There are plenty of tips and tricks for your particular smartphone. In just a 5-minute search on the internet, you can find like very specific tips and tricks. If anybody, I'll put my contact details at the end of this. So if anybody wants to email me with any specific questions about their smartphone, I'll try and help if I can, but I can certainly point you to some resources that I've come across in my research. But there's plenty of great videos, etc. out there. So most of the phones that are out there now have got pretty good camera apps and photo apps included in the unit. I think the iPhone particularly has got a lot better at being able to take better quality photos. But there may be some free and paid apps that can help you as well. So just understanding what you've got, the power that you've got with you is the first thing to check. And optimizing it, checking in your camera settings is really helpful as well. And one item that I think is really, really useful to have on your phone camera is the grid mode. So in iPhones, you go into the camera setting button, which is, you have to scroll down quite a bit to get to that. And you'll have various options, and the one that says grid, and we'll come back to why that's useful a bit later, but it certainly is something that I think you should activate if you don't already. So all the smartphone cameras have slightly different layout and slightly different functionality, but there are some similarities across all of the models. I'm just going to quickly touch on some of them so that if you've used them, then brilliant. If you haven't, then it might be worth having a little play either during this session. And if you've got any questions, come back to me on the chat. Which my colleague is manning for me. But if you don't understand the settings, just spend a little bit of time to understand them and find out what works best for you. Some things you'll use and some things you'll never use again, but it's worth having a look. Flash. The symbol in the top left of this device, which is an iPhone screen grab from, I think, an iPhone 8. Flash, almost never put it on. It's just a very, very bright light. It will bleach out everything and anything. The night modes in most modern smartphones are pretty good at picking up low light. I would never use the flash directly on a subject. So I will always have that switched off as default. It's my preference, but I think it's a useful thing to be able to do. HDR may or may not feature on some of your smartphone devices. Again, the later models of both Android and iPhone tend to have it integrated into the software. It's about, I've got an example here. The one on the left is just a photo taken in normal mode, and then with HDR activated on the other side. HDR, high dynamic range, and it basically is about taking the smartphone takes a photo that it thinks is underexposed, one that it thinks is overexposed, and one that it thinks is correctly exposed, and it merges them into one picture, and it pops out the colors and everything. So if you've got in your settings, if you've got the option to switch it on and it isn't already, have an experiment with that, because I think the quality of the image will be improved. Some of the other images on there, other features. So we've got Live, which is an iPhone feature. I'm not sure it has a commercial basis. It basically is a very, very short movie clip of a picture. I often switch this off by default. And again, you can do that in the camera settings. Timer is very useful if you want to take a photo with that you want to be in it. So you can set it up, and I would recommend you stabilizing your smartphone and setting it on something solid so that it doesn't move. Or you can get a little unit like this. This is called a Joby. It kind of will look like a mini tripod. You can get these fairly cheaply on online. I think this is about £20. Get secondhand ones as well. But if you've got an expensive smartphone, make sure you have a good solid tripod to protect it from being knocked over. So the timer mode, you can set it 3, 5, 10 seconds so that you can set that up and then get into the photo. Great for doing self-portraits as well for your profile pictures. Note about that, do email us any pictures that you've taken of yourself that you want touched up if you want us to do that for you today. We would normally be doing headshots directly at the British Library, but sadly we're not there in person today. Filters, I would advise taking the best photo that you can in camera and not using a filter before you take the picture, but applying a filter if you want to in editing afterwards. I think just take the best you can in camera, and then you will be able to do more with it afterwards, rather than cropping and zooming in and adding filters. Some of the camera modes are quite interesting to play with for business photography. You've got the normal photo mode, and depending on the model of your phone will depend on how many rear cameras you have. I think there's a Huawei that's got 5 rear cameras, which is nuts, but have a whatever you kind of photography you want to do. You might be interested in perhaps some of the wide angle rear view cameras as well. Time lapse is quite an interesting mode to use. I recently used time lapse to film the installation of a Christmas tree, and that makes for some quite interesting social footage, especially for your business. So anything that requires a build, that has the sun rising or traffic moving, it's quite interesting to kind of speed that up and have that as a interesting content. Slow-mo, less interesting for commercial purposes, in my opinion, but some people find it useful. I've seen hairdressers, for example, have their models loosen their lovely blow-drying hair, and it's sort of epically waves in slow motion. So it all depends what your content is going to be, to whether you'll find that useful. Portrait modes are getting really good in all devices, and there's some fantastic features to be able to blur the background out and apply kind of lighting filters in portrait mode. Square may not be an option on some of your devices, but again, I would recommend not capturing a photo in square mode, but editing it down into square, just so that you aren't losing quality straight away. And panoramic is definitely one to have a play with. It's super for letterbox images across like Facebook covers or LinkedIn profile pictures. And great for landscapes. Again, depends what your story is with that. And have a play with these functions. See what your camera is capable of. See what you like. See what you don't like, and that will you'll probably get a little bit more out of the smartphone that you've got, rather than spending money on upgrading to a new one. So filters, as I say, I prefer being quite authentic with my photography and not messing around too much with filters. So I prefer natural and authentic, but it totally depends, and it's very subjective. So just a quick moment about taking a photo. I know I'm kind of normally in face-to-face, we spend a little time talking about this, but have a think. Just when you are physically taking a photo, imagine you are, for example, just going to take a photo of an object in front of you. How are you holding the camera? How are you holding your device? Which orientation are you holding it in? And also physically, how do you actually take the photo? Because, for example, I could be taking a picture here and I would tap on the screen or tap on my on the shutter button. So one thing to definitely consider is when you are taking a photo for your business rather than just a snap for pleasure, is you want to take a little bit more of a considered photograph and like really take time to make sure you're steady and you're holding your expensive smartphone carefully, but also just even taking it out of your pocket or out of your bag. Give it a little wipe, because the lenses will get fingerprints, especially with hand sanitizer moments when you're taking it out of your pocket or your bag. You know, just take a little wipe of it, hold it steady. And one feature that is pretty useful to know, again, on most devices, and it's super easy with iPhone, and most devices have some version of it as well, is when you actually are physically going to take the photo, if you decide with your finger to decide where you're going to put the focus, you tap and hold on the screen, and the symbol AEAF lock will come up on the screen. Have a little play with that. That means that you have taken a little bit of control of deciding where the focus and the exposure is going to be on your image. So it gives you that extra second to think about what you're taking a photo of, looking at the kind of composition overall. You tap and hold, and there's a little sun symbol on the screen, and you can scroll up or scroll down, and that will make it brighter or darker. In the example on the screen, the apple on the left was just taken a snap on the phone with the overhead kitchen lights lighting it up. The one on the right, I tapped where I wanted it to be focused and exposed, and I slightly brightened the image before I took the photo. You can see that it's AEAF lock on the screen grab there. That's definitely worth having a play with on your device. And if you can't easily make it work on your device, it's probably there somewhere. Let me know, send us your details, and I'll research that for you. Another thing about taking photos for your business, rather than just taking a snap for pleasure, is really thinking about what's the story. Why are you taking that photo? How are you going to use that image? And I say, what's the story? Imagine that you are actually briefing a professional photographer that's going to cost time and money. You've got to think about, making sure that their time is optimized, that you're not spending money, wasting money by giving them incomplete information. So this is really about planning. And if anybody would like, I've got a brief template that I like to use with my clients. So you tell me where this is taking place, what it's going to be used for, when do you need the images, what the formats are. And if you kind of plan, if you're going to do a photo shoot, so perhaps your product shots or your headshots or your images, your stock images for your website, or some content images for your social feeds. Think about planning it, and it will give you a better kind of structure, keep you focused, and stop you from wasting your time or energy or money. Thinking about what's the story, because a picture does speak 1,000 words. And you know, what do you want your viewer of that image to do or think or act? It's kind of like definitely having a story there. Think about why you're taking the photo, and if you're taking it for the website or video, and video is definitely useful for social media, and it's kind of makes for some very compelling content. So where you're going to use this, the images or the photo, the video, will have an impact on where you take it, when you take it, what orientation you take it as well. You know, literally, you know, taking video in portrait mode is very good for Instagram Reels, for example, but landscape mode might be better for LinkedIn or Facebook, for example. So if you know how you're going to use the photo, that might have an impact on the size and the format. You wouldn't necessarily want to record in 4K video if your smartphone's capable of doing that, if it's just going to be used on social media. It uses up too much storage, and you know, may take too long to download. So think about what your subject is, and how, you know, never work with children or animals, they say. And I recently had to photograph some meerkats at London Zoo. So they don't pose for you. So you've got to think about how do you get the best out of your subject, and you'd be thinking about these things before you even actually photograph them. And also think about where you're taking it, and do you need to take extra lighting? Do you need somebody to help you, like hold you know, hold a ladder for you or whatever? So planning, I can't stress enough, it's really helpful. Really, it gives you a good structure and keeps you efficient and kind of focused on what you need to do. So big question, incredibly subjective. What makes a great photo? So normally I ask people to kind of throw ideas at me. For me personally, I like things to be in focus, and I like straight lines to be straight. But there are two very fundamental things about photography, and the clue is in the name, for the word photography. It means in the Greek photography or something. I'm afraid I'm not very good at Greek. It means light drawing. So mastering the light and being in control of as much of the light as possible is really helpful. Use available light, move yourself to be nearer the light, move your subject if that's possible or easy. Watch out for hard lighting, like big fluorescent light or direct sunlight or that flash. You know, just try and avoid that, because you get really deep shadows, unflattering shadows. And try and use the shade when you're outside, which is kind of feels a bit weird, but when a bride or a couple open the windows on their wedding day and go, oh, it's glorious blue skies and big bright sunshine, that's actually not that helpful. Everybody's squinting and everybody has these big shadows, and always try to avoid flash where you can. This is an example. This is horrifies me every day. It wasn't a very pleasant donut in the first place, but just under that same light I had with the apple, it looks a bit grim anyway. But when you use flash, it looks radioactive. Just don't use it. And the great thing about being kind of sustainable, you don't have to use additional studio lights. Studio lights can be super expensive. Use natural daylight wherever you can. And also think, something as simple as a piece of card or a piece of white paper, you can bounce any available lights onto your subject. And kind of, you can see a little, obviously I'm shaded there, but you play around with this. There's probably too much light on me at this precise moment to prove my point, but by just moving a piece of paper around, you can start directing any lights into those shadowy areas. Also, very important for photography is composition. And composition will very much depend on what your story is, but there are certain rules for composition, and I prefer to call them kind of considerations. It's things to think about, things to be aware of, and just thinking about them will make you look at your images slightly differently. And I've got some examples of these. There's a very well-known composition rule called the rule of thirds. And there are some other ones on there, rule of odds. Always, when you're taking pictures of humans or animals, anything with eyes, you are drawn to eyes in a picture. So always think about the eyes being the windows to your soul. Think about interesting angles, leading lines, and always zoom with your feet if you can. So get closer to your subject if you can, or get your subject closer to you, because zooming on your smartphone is diminishing the quality of your image. So just a few whiz through these. The rule of thirds, remember the grid lines that I ask you to make sure that you've got on your smartphone. The rule of thirds uses those kind of grid lines as a principle for composition. And it's said that you put the thing that you want your viewer of that image to look at on one of these crosshairs of the grid. This is an image I've taken in St Pancras Station of the Betjeman statue. And this image roughly falls into the grid line. Remember, the windows are the eyes of the soul. Even though it's a sculpture, you are directed to his eyes. So I'm kind of almost following this rule, but it was interesting that compositionally it was almost following it anyway. Rule of odds. Apparently your brain is not very excited by even numbers. It finds that balance a bit boring. So 2s, 4s, 6s and 8s is not as interested as 3s, 5s, 7s and 9s. Apparently though, your brain gets a bit confused beyond 9. So consider that, especially with product photos. Think about how you arrange those, and rule of thirds. 3s particularly work well, as do triangles on things. Here's an image. I use accent color, HDR. My eye is drawn to the hut, and then it goes around the picture. Here is a leading line, and you've got it into the distance, kind of like the sky and the grass and this middle third. A row of bikes. If I was doing this professionally though, I would have made sure all the seats were the right height. But again, accent color, leading lines, your eye is interested in going into the picture. Again, with an underground station. Buildings, I like my buildings to be straight. It's quite tricky to take a picture, especially a wide angle picture of a building without this kind of parallax distortion that goes in, but you can make that work well for you, because your eye is drawn in this instance to the clock tower and not worried too much about the rest of the building. Again, here's a nice shot. You're kind of drawn to your subject into in the distance, and I zoomed with my feet and got a bit closer just to have a different composition, although I missed on a rainbow. So how do you go from average to good or great? Basically, it's editing, but my big adage on editing is life is too short to be spending time editing, because it's a skill in its own right. Photoshopping is quite a complex procedure, so I keep things simple with my editing, with my professional editing and with my smartphone editing. Always try and do the best you can in camera, take loads of photos, delete later. You can use the in-camera editing tools, which I totally recommend, and iPhones particularly have got a load better at doing photo editing in the camera. So you don't necessarily have to use any other apps, but Instagram obviously does a lot of filtering and simple tools on Instagram. That's quite good, as do probably the other social media formats. But there are some free apps, Snapseed, Adobe Lightroom, are two that I have used, and you can obviously use external software. But these are the three key things that I only ever really do with my photography, and that's I will have a look at an auto adjust. I'll see what the I think I've taken a quite good picture. I'll see what the smartphone thinks, and I'll play around with those options. I like my straight line straight, so I'll play around with making sure that it's straight. And I will use the cropping tools as well to make into square or change into the 4:5 aspect ratio that Instagram seems to be quite popular at the moment. So just three very, very simple things. And that can be done usually in the photo editing app. And here's an example of Snapseed and Adobe Lightroom for those additional features. And the last thing is about using them and not losing them. So definitely save, share, store, and then possibly print. Saving them on your phone, but be all very aware of mobile phone thefts and losing our phones, etc. So definitely organize them better, organize your photos on your phone better, sharing them, and with Apple Air, you can AirDrop easily between devices. It's really super quick. You can store them on your PC or Mac or loads of external hard drives. But in the cloud, maybe a little bit greener, but have a think about sourcing suppliers and kit that have got a good sustainability message, recycling, etc. Because batteries are our biggest problem in smartphones and technology, full stop. And finally, here are all my details. So as I say, I run a photography business. I do workshops on smartphone photography with the Business and IP Centre, and there's another one coming up in December. Feel free to contact me directly. Sharing is caring. I like to help other people get the best out of their photography with whatever device they've got. I will share whatever I know, and also we can do professional photography for your business as well, if needed. But you have got the best tool available in your pocket. So keep playing. Keep them updated and optimized, and so that you don't have to completely go for the next new shiny tool, and recycle and responsibly with your kit, and source from kind of ethical green places. That's kind of, and do some research on it, because it's quite interesting digging a bit deep. Everybody talks about sustainability, but not everybody actually has a decent program and of that. So I think I'm almost to time. And thank you very much for listening in. Do get in touch if you have got any questions, and I thank you to the British Library for the opportunity to share my words of wisdom. Thank you.